to Genesis 25. That's where we ended last time. Genesis 25, and I'll pray, and then we can get started. Father, we thank you for so much joy. We thank you for good food and good fellowship and just time growing close to one another. Thank you so much for the body of Christ. We thank you for our brothers and sisters. We thank you that we can love one another and encourage one another and challenge one another. We thank you for some of those brothers and sisters leading an adventure club and the way that they serve the children and teach. And just pray, Father, that you would use that ministry and use our time tonight. Help us all grow in knowledge. Help us love you, love your word. Help us be joyful. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, Genesis chapter 25. We ended around verse 11 last time, but I'm going to read it again and just to catch us up. So we have finished the wonderful story of Isaac and Rebekah, and then we come back in the land and we hear about Abraham in the end of his life. So look at Genesis 25, starting in verse 1. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimram, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, Leumim. The sons of Midian were those names. And all these were the children of Keturah. Verse 5. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts while he was still living. He sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. Okay, so we hit some of the highlights of this last time. We talked about some of the negative sides of trying to think through what did it mean that he had concubines, what did it mean that he got married again, but we also saw a lot of positive things, right? That he gets to live 175 years, and that is a good old age. He breathed his last, or as the KJV, you guys remember what the KJV says there? He gave up the ghost. Do you remember that phrase? They would interpret that word breathe as spirit, but I like Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. We talked about how it's a touching thing that his sons come, both sons, not just Isaac, but Isaac and Ishmael. They come to bury him and make sure he's taken care of and buried in the place that he bought, buried next to his wife. The one thing that I wanted to touch on, two things. One, I wanted to clarify, just because I said it fuzzy last time. If I wasn't clear, there's a Sheba and a Dedan in another genealogy. And so I was talking about how for some of these descendants, it seems like, oh, we know that place. That's going to become Sheba. But for Sheba and Dedan specifically, they're in another older genealogy. There's another Sheba and Dedan that become the ancestors of those people, and it's probably not related to these people at all. The exception to that would be maybe Midian. It seems like the place could line up and the name could line up that these could be ancestors of the Midianites. But the rest of the names we don't know much about. So I wanted to clarify that. The other thing I wanted to focus on is a practical thing, and maybe this is a stretch, but it just got me thinking. There's an amazing amount of preparation and planning that went into Abraham's death. As he, as a man of God, and maybe you could say, well, he had 175 years to think about it, but it just seems like he was really carefully taking care of things. He wanted to make it very clear that the son of promise was Isaac. He doesn't want there to be some dynastic rivalry or some one kid trying to kill another kid or take over the family inheritance or anything like that. So I think you just get this picture. He's very carefully making it clear, no, everything's going to go to Isaac. He's the inheritor. He's the one who's going to inherit the promise. But then he also makes sure his other kids are taken care of. He sends them away with gifts. He plans for that. He's planned to have a cave that would be long-lasting, and everybody knows this deal is made as he makes a deal for Sarah's burial place. Just struck me as maybe something to copy, maybe something to apply to our own lives, to be thinking about that, maybe especially husbands. Be thinking about that, be planning. There's something righteous about someone dying in faith who has thought it out well and has tried to bless his family and serve them in that way. So that was just something I noticed. Anything else you noticed before we move on to verse 12? Okay. Verse 12. These are the generations of Ishmael. Oh, yes, Ethan. Good question. Yeah. Where did Abraham go? What would y'all say to that? We see him again in the Bible, at least in an illustration. What were you going to say? Sheol, right? That's where I think you'd say it's kind of a generic term for the dead, right? Going into Sheol. What else? Any other comments there? Ethan, do you have any comments? Is this something you'd like to speak about? Yeah, I think the way I understand that, and you can correct me if y'all see things differently, is he is a man of faith, he is a believer, and he'd get to go be with the Lord. And the passage that I was talking about earlier was, you remember the illustration that Jesus uses, and it's the rich man, and where does Lazarus get to go? He gets to go up to Abraham's bosom. Do you remember that? And so I think that's at least a sign. I know that's just a story, but Jesus calls it that he gets to go up to heaven, and it's called Abraham's bosom. So it makes you think Abraham's probably there, you know. And so I think it's a saint who dies in the Lord in any age gets to go be with the Lord in spirit, and will be raised again on the last day, united to a body. So, everybody happy with that? Yeah, David? Yeah. 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 Yeah, that could, we talked about that last time, of he was gathered to his people. So that could be he's gathered to his heavenly people or something like that. We talked about last time how it seems to be perhaps talking about his family. They gather him and they bury him. They surround him. He has people. He has this clan, and they take care of him. So, good thoughts. All right, let's move on. So, verse 12. These are the generations of Ishmael. Now, if there's somebody who has never taken a Hebrew class in their life, do you happen to remember what word is Hebrew for generations? So we've said it a few times. Toledot. Yeah, Ramiro, you've taken a Hebrew class. Cheater. But other people answered too. So these are the generations of Ishmael. Yeah, Toledot. And the reason why we keep bringing that one up is because, remember, that seems to be such an important structural word. We keep moving from section to section with that word on generations. And we see that in verse 12. We're going to see it again in verse 19. You look down at 19. These are the generations of Isaac. Okay, so we have a whole Toledoth, a whole section of Genesis right here in verses 12 through 18. And it's just telling us the rest of Ishmael's story. So look at verse 12. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's sons. son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth: Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen. Okay, so that's the last we hear about Ishmael. We hear about his descendants. We hear him passing away as well. What comes to mind as you hear that? Nothing. So, what came to mind for me is the promises, right? Oh, what, were you going to say something, Hannah? Yeah, I think I think it's like a phrase for opposite. People would say, okay, so the word for settled is actually fell. So some people think that he died, and he died like in a battle against his own family members. But I think I like what the ESV says. I think it's telling us where he and his people, where their lot fell, where they settled. And I think it's opposite Egypt, it says that, and kind of up against his kinsmen. So he's not coming into the land. And so if you're thinking about a map, where this would be, okay, if Egypt is down here, and so you have Israel right here, and you got the whole Mediterranean Sea here. So Israel's right here, Egypt's down here. You have the Sinai Peninsula right here, and then it stretches this way into the Arabian desert. I think that's the territory that the Ishmaelites end up, Havilah and Shur. And so it's opposite from Egypt. I think it's like across the Red Sea from Egypt, and it says in the direction of Assyria. So it's this way from Egypt, right? And so I think it starts here, and it jets up against the people, the rest of Abraham's people. So, yeah, I think it's location. I think it's where they dwelt. So they're south of Israel. What I was going to say earlier is it's hard not to think of the promises that we read, and I'm going to read those to you. This is in chapter 16. You can flip there or just listen. But twice, Hagar despairs for her life and the life of her son, once when Ishmael is still in her womb, and then again later as he's a young boy. She gets cast out twice and close to death twice. Well, the first time, while Ishmael is still in her womb, Genesis 16, verse 10, the angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. That phrase, dwell, is another reason why I think it's talking about where he's going to live, like I was just saying a minute ago. That phrase is so similar. You can tell that, right? He's going to dwell over against all his kinsmen. And so God tells Hagar, through the angel of the Lord, God tells Hagar, number one, Ishmael's going to turn into a whole lot of people. Number two, he's going to live in this area. And so as we read our passage and we read the end of the Ishmael story, I just wanted to bring up, it's exactly what God said. And of course, we would expect it to be so. But it's exactly what God said. Okay, any questions on Ishmael or his land? Yes, Jonathan? It is unique, right? It's 12 princes and tribes. Again, I think that's a full fulfillment of they're being multiplied, and he's got these descendants of more than one area, more than one nation, you might say. People would say, isn't it startling at least that there's 12 and 12? You have these 12 sons of Ishmael, and then you're going to, in the next generation, have 12 sons of Jacob. But I don't know if we're supposed to make anything out of that or if it's just reporting what happened. So he also gets to live a long life, 137 years, and very similar language to Abraham that we talked about last time. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. So I think they gather him in, they go through burial rites and take care of him. Cool. All right, our next Toledoth. Look at verse 19. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Okay, let's pause there. So this Toledot that we just started in verse 19 is going to go all the way through the end of chapter 35. So this is a big one. And then we're going to have a one-chapter Toledot for Esau, and then we're going to have chapter 37 all the way through the end as our final one, the Toledot of Jacob. That doesn't mean from here all the way through the end of chapter 35 is all about Isaac. It's actually mostly about Jacob. And that kind of fits a pattern that we've seen for the most part, is that it's not just about the person, it's also about their descendants, like we just read about in the one for Ishmael. So we start this new book, this new section, Generations of Isaac, who's Abraham's son. He's 40 years old when he marries Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Verse 21. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is thus, why is this happening to me? Or why do I live? So she went to inquire of the Lord. So let's just pause there for just a minute. Already, this is a lot of heartache and a lot of drama in their story. And I know I just said it in a few verses, right? But this is hard. She's upset about this. She's barren. We don't know how long it's been. But Isaac is praying for her, and the Lord grants the prayer. And Rebekah was able to conceive. But as she conceives, it says the children struggled together within her. So she's pregnant with twins, and they quarrel, and she can feel it. There's something wrong, and I think it's startling to her. If it is thus, why is this happening to me? I think that's a statement of almost like despair, or, this is bad. Why is this happening? This is something bad. So she went to inquire of the Lord. So this, I think she can already tell there's something wrong here, there's pain here. And that's how the Lord responds. Verse 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. When her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. So let me read again what the Lord says. 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. I just want to pause here to mention just the striking sovereignty of the Lord, how he's in charge over all these things. He has a very specific plan about what's going on in her womb and what's going on with her. And for a time, that plan was she wasn't able to get pregnant. And then for a time, she was able to get pregnant, but right away, God puts babies in her womb that are not just babies, but they're the ancestors of what's going to become 2 nations that are always at conflict with each other. And so you just have this picture, I think, that God does what he wants. And I know that's an obvious statement. But you just see that so clearly here. He does what he pleases. This doesn't feel right in her, and it's not even a very happy message that she receives. And yet, there's just such an understanding God's doing exactly what he is planning to do, and he's in charge of these things, and he knows what he's doing. He also already says the older shall serve the younger. So they know this before the boys are even born. They've received a prophecy from the Lord that the older will serve the younger. So look at 25. She gives birth to the twins. Verse 25, the first came out red, his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau, which means hairy. So there you go. I don't think that's a very attractive picture of what happened. I'm sure they love their child, though. So the first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak, so they called his name Hairy. Afterward, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac which means deceiver or grabbing the heel. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Okay, so what do you notice? Observations, humorous points, questions, comments. Yes, Nathan?
20 years of marriage is proof of barrenness.
Yeah, there you go. It's a good, yeah. We find out he's 60 years old and 26. And so they had been married for 20 years. That's a long time. Yeah, we do know how long it is. Earlier I said we don't know how long it was, but we do know it's 20 years, right? It's good. What else?
That's not typical for one baby to come out.
Right. Yeah.
All of this is very unusual.
It's very unique, right? I mean, when was the last time you ever heard of one baby coming out holding onto the heel of another? You know, just, yeah. What else? Yeah, true. What else do you notice? They each had their favorite, right? And that doesn't really seem to be a good thing. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. That feels a little shallow. I don't know. Just feels like maybe we're misunderstanding there, but it does use the word because. So because he eats of his game, he loves Esau. So maybe that was the spark. Esau started bringing back game, every day, and it's just what he loved to eat, and they got kind of buddy-buddy over it and really enjoyed each other. Rebekah loved Jacob, it says. So Rebekah, remember, knows all the way from birth, and I'm guessing she shared this with her husband, but she at least certainly knows that the older will serve the younger, and so she seems to have some favoritism towards the younger. Isaac has some favoritism towards Esau. What else do you notice? True. Right. In life, like in their physical life, seems like Esau is stronger. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger. What do you think about that line? One shall be stronger than the other. Who's the one and who's the other? Esau's stronger physically. I could see maybe he's saying something if he's thinking about the two peoples from within you shall be divided, then you might say Israel is a stronger nation than Edom ever becomes. And maybe that's what it's saying. So, what else? I saw something over here. Yeah, Jillian? Right. Okay, so let's talk about that word a little bit because it's kind of confusing. So look at 27 again. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. Now that word for quiet, every other time it's used in the Old Testament, it's used for something like an upright man, a godly man. It's used of Job. He's an upright man, a blameless man. And for some reason it's translated here quiet. And Ethan and I were talking about this a little bit today. The word can be used for something like, it's used in the tabernacle for when two rings are put together on the tents. So it's the only other time I found that it's used. But so this could be saying that Jacob is a godly man. I think that people shy away from that because he displays some ungodly behavior in upcoming chapters. I think people also shy away from that because it seems like the author's trying to compare him to Esau, right? Esau was this skillful hunter, and Jacob didn't do that, So Jacob was quiet; he stayed in the tents. But I kind of think it's Esau is this more foolish. Yes, he's a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob maybe is more well-rounded or more of an upright man, and he dwells in tents. So, for what it's worth. Some translations use the word normal there. He's a normal man. So yeah, Esau is a skillful hunter, and Jacob is a plain or normal man. So, any other thoughts there? Yeah, Jonathan?
Yeah, going back to verse 22, where it just says, so she went to inquire of the Lord. Where is she going?
It's a good question.
How does inquiring work? It seems like it really changes over the whole course of the Bible how people interact with God.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. I never even noticed that. We went to inquire of the Lord. Maybe she went to her husband and asked him to pray. The Lord listened to his prayer before. I'd always assumed it's probably something like she went to one of the altars that Abraham had built. She went to Beersheba or she went to Bethel, these places where God had been seen and heard, and went to pray there. And the Lord answers her. Great questions, great comments. Yeah, Ethan?
Yeah, I know you had highlighted earlier the sovereignty of God. We see your eyes floating from the sky. But also, too, it's amazing how sometimes one of our most natural questions is how does prayer work with the sovereignty of God?
Right. Well, we're gonna keep fiddling with that as we keep going through the next chapter. So we're not gonna get there yet, but yeah, I do want to come back to that idea of sovereignty, because I think we do notice that strikingly in this chapter of God is just doing what he wants to do, and he's the one who's in charge of this. He opens and closes the womb. He decides who is in that womb, and he knows already who those people are going to become and what the nations are going to look like. Astounding sovereignty. And it's striking because as you turn to the New Testament and you're in Romans, and Paul is addressing issues about God's sovereignty and kind of going back and forth with someone asking questions or giving objections, he cites this passage as an example of the Lord does what he pleases. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. That whole idea of the Lord knowing what he's doing, and that's his prerogative. God is allowed to do whatever he wants to do. He's the one who's in charge. Ethan brought up, well then, it's astounding that he's using the prayer of Isaac, and he's answering the prayer of Rebekah, and he's using us in that plan of sovereignty, and we're going to keep talking about that as we go through, because it's not only prayer that he's using. So, any other comments before we move on? All right, so I think in general, the point is this is God's blessing to them, these children, but it comes with tension, and she can feel that while the babies are still in her womb. And sure enough, we're going to get to see that tension. I think that Jacob, we're meant to understand, maybe is a godly or well-rounded man, even though he's about to act in ways that aren't the best. But look at verse 29. Once, when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." Therefore, his name was called Edom, which means red. And so, the person normally we call Esau, the nation normally we call Edom. But sometimes the scriptures switch that. They call the nation Esau, and sometimes we see here that Esau was called Edom. So Esau's hairy, Edom is red. Esau was red and hairy, and he liked red stew. So Jacob said exactly what you'd said, exactly what you would say. Sell me your birthright now. Uh, you know, so, you know, yeah, it's surprising to me that he thought of that, just in that moment. But his brother's really hungry and he's exhausted. Verse 32, Esau said, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? And Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. I've always read this as Esau is a drama queen, just totally foolish. He's like, what I used to always say when I was a kid, Mom, I'm starving. I'm not actually starving, right? But it seems like maybe he's actually pretty worried. He's exhausted, and because he even says, I'm about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me? So again, maybe he's being overly dramatic, but I think he might be genuinely worried about this, and maybe not. But either way, Jacob takes advantage of the situation and says, sure, you can have this stew if you sell me your birthright. Swear to me now. So Esau did it. He swore to him. And thus Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. And I think we are meant to understand that whether or not he thought he was going to die, this was still a foolish thing. He despised, he looked down on it, he didn't take it seriously. He didn't care about it enough. Yes, Ethan?
What is a birthright in this culture? What is that?
That's a good question. So normally in this culture, who would get the birthright? The firstborn, right? And we still see that a lot of times today. So there is a generally pretty strict adherence to that in the ancient world, that the firstborn would get the birthright. And it makes sense. It's the longest that you have with a child to train them up, and it's the one who probably helped raise a lot of the other younger kids, is already in that leadership position in the family. It's normally the firstborn. But again, God is allowed to do whatever he wants, right? And God has already declared that the older shall serve the younger. As Jacob and Esau are doing this, I don't know if this was a thing they did. I don't know if this is the first time Jacob asked, and Esau does this, but it seems to be that they understand that what would be very normal is for Esau to have the birthright, and for that to be given. That would need to be given to Jacob. That answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, Jonathan?
But how does that actually change the story? Does Isaac get something different now? Because it sure seems
It's a good question. Okay, hold on to that question. All right, you guys are asking all the right questions, but we have more to add, okay? Chapter 26, verse 1. Now, there was a famine in the land. Never mind. We're not going to get to the other part. So I'll pause and answer that question. Okay, you know the next part in 27. We're going to do 26 first, so that's why I don't think we'll have time. But you know the next part in 27 that there's another time that Jacob acts pretty sneakily, right? And you remember what he does? What does he do? He does the hair, right? He gets the animal skins, pretends to be Esau, so that as Jacob is looking to bless his son and give blessings, he's going to give the greater blessing to Esau. We'll talk about when we get there. Was that righteous? Is he disobeying the Lord? Does he know that this should go to Jacob? God seemed to have made that very clear to Rebekah. But whatever the case, Jacob deceives Isaac, and so Isaac gives that blessing of the firstborn to Jacob. So now I want to bring up the question that they were asking. Why is it that Jacob received this blessing? Is it because God predicted it ahead of time when he was in the womb? Or is it because he tricked Esau into giving him that birthright, selling him that birthright? Or is it because he tricked Isaac into giving him that blessing? Why is it that he actually receives that blessing? What would you say to that? Yes. Yeah, I think you just say yes. God has clearly foreordained this, but he's also clearly working through situations, and his sovereign hand is over this. Now, I think we could challenge and point and say, well, hey, if God promised this, then Jacob shouldn't have had to feel like he had to do any of the deceptive stuff. If he knows that the Lord has revealed this, that the older is going to serve the younger, then he should have just accepted that by faith and not done all the sneaky stuff. And I think he's going to get some payback for the sneaky stuff anyways in life. But still, the way that it worked out, the story that we know is God did promise this, and this story happened with Esau, and this story happened with Isaac. And so why is it that he got the blessing? Well, it's all those things. I think the sovereign Lord promised, but he worked through this situation, and he worked through this situation, even if those weren't the best situations. Does that make sense? Yeah, Eric? Right. Right. Yeah, I think it's, so it says, thus Esau despised his birthright, and I think it's saying, this is the way, this is how it happened. So the event that we read, I think we're to take that as, that's his summary of the event, is he just thought so lowly of his birthright that he was willing to do something like this, sell it for a pot of stew. And in that way, he denigrated it, or it was low in his esteem. He despised it. That kind of, yeah, Eric? Yeah, I do think it's similar in the sense of, in English, we normally use the word despise, like, I despise you, I hate you. And that's what it normally means for us in English. But I think there's another sense in which, even in English, despise can just mean to, like, kind of look down upon, like you'd despise something that got on your shoe, or something like that. So I think there's that idea that when we read despise, it doesn't mean he had to hate it. I think it's more like he just thought lowly of it. He didn't think it was important. Good questions. Okay, so we're going to keep struggling with this and thinking through this, but it's just astounding. I think we see the true God, the infinite God, the creator God, sovereignly keeping his promises and doing it through even situations that involve sinful men in messy situations, which we know, of course, continues through all the scriptures, right? That it was by the hands of sinful men that even Christ was crucified, and the Lord was sovereignly working in that situation to bring salvation. Okay, Genesis 26, verse 1. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the former famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Gerar to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Okay, so a new famine. It's different than the old famine. And so again, he needs to sojourn down. And remember, this needs to happen because if they're dwelling up in the hills and there's a famine and there's no rain and they can't grow crops, you pretty much can always still grow crops down closer to the Mediterranean Sea in that region where the Philistines lived. And this was the southern region of that. So he goes down to see Abimelech. He sojourns there. And what we're going to see is he ends up running into a lot of the same places and situations that Abraham did. Verse 2. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Very clear, right? Now, the Lord had revealed to Abraham that the future generations, some future generations, would be going down to Egypt. And so if they knew this, then maybe that would be a little confusing. Maybe that's right where they were headed, as they're headed down towards Egypt, because Abimelech is kind of on the way to that. But the Lord appears to him and stops him and says, don't go to Egypt. You stay here because it's this land that I'm going to give you. So this is where you're going to sojourn. And we see him repeat the promises that we know very well because we've read them several times given to Abraham. He's repeating those to Isaac. Now, he has these promises. They're his. It's your offspring as the stars of heaven. It's not Ishmael's. It's yours, Isaac. It's your offspring as the stars of heaven. I'm giving your offspring all these lands. It's not Ishmael gets these lands. It's not you get half and Ishmael gets half. No, you're inheriting that whole promise. It's through Isaac. Why? Verse 5, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. So this is now, if we weren't convinced earlier that it was unconditional, it is unconditional now, right? Because Abraham is dead. He can't disobey. So since he was faithful for his whole life, we know this is set in stone now. These promises have passed on to Isaac. It's through his descendants that the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Verse 6, so Isaac settled in Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister. Here we go again. For he feared to say my wife, thinking lest the men of the place should kill me because of Rebekah, because she was attractive in appearance. When he had been there a long time, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked out of a window and saw Isaac laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech called Isaac and said, behold, she is your wife. How then could you say, she is my sister? Isaac said to him, because I thought lest I die because of her. Now, he doesn't even have an excuse. He can't do the Abraham thing and say, well, she is actually my sister. This is just straight up lie all the way. So he copies his dad. He does the whole wife is my sister thing. But Abimelech figures it out because he sees them, and he sees them laughing. And, what does Isaac's name mean? Laughter. So, it's his own namesake that gets him in trouble, is that he's laughing with Rebekah, his wife. So Abimelech can tell something's up, Normal people don't. There's something flirty about the thing they're doing, or he could just tell they're very close or something. They're laughing together, and Abimelech knows they're married. Verse 10, Abimelech said, what is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us. So Abimelech warned all the people, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Okay, so let's pause there. First, we need to clarify something, is that Abimelech, maybe this is the same Abimelech, but it's been at least 80 years. And so I think it's more likely that they had some dynastic names, and this is a descendant of Abimelech. Remember Abimelech, do you remember what it means? My daddy's the king, right? So you could see how that would be a name that gets passed on from prince to prince as their dad is the king. So I do think this is another Abimelech. We're going to see the same thing with Phicol, the commander of the army, later in the chapter. Perhaps that's another, because it was Abraham and Phicol over 80 years ago, and now it's the same names here. So I think probably these are names that are being passed down, or titles. Maybe they're titles that we just don't understand because we don't speak Philistine. Does that make sense? So that's the first thing. The other thing is, remember in the past, whenever Abraham would visit, Sarah was usually brought into the harem or into the king's house. This doesn't seem, the concern here from Abimelech on behalf of the people is that anybody could have taken her as a wife and not just him. And so he says, you brought this guilt upon us, and he warns everybody, saying, whoever touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. Now again, I think you see that he could have had faith all along, right? He knows he has this promise from God, and God just repeated it to him again. I'm going to make you this father of the nations. This is going to happen. You don't need to fear. And I think you see in Abimelech's response of, no, it's not just that we won't kill you. It's that I'll put a ban on everybody from even coming close to her so that everybody knows that she's your wife. And I think it's just a sign. It seems like this is another time where Isaac could have trusted the Lord, and he didn't. He was fearful, and he lied. Yes, Hannah? Right. Yeah. It's definitely odd. Yeah. Yeah. I know for Abraham, he says that he fears that they'll kill him. And, right. Yeah. Probably. Yeah. Yeah, I think she maybe would have been seen as on the market in perhaps a more literal way than we might use that phrase today. So I think she would have been seen that way. Maybe they're inquiring of their, or something like that. And he needs to make sure everybody now knows, okay, not on the market. You brought guilt on us. So, Eric, yeah. It's true. Yeah. That's a good point. It seems like we are reminded of one of Abraham's failings right after God says, Abraham obeyed my voice. But I think in a similar way, it's this life of faith for Abraham. We see this progress. We do see him showing such great faith when he's tested. But yeah, it is striking. And it is stunning how similar it is to that story from Abraham. That verse 6 itself, I know seems short, so Isaac settled in Gerar, and it feels like, did he just disobey God's promise or something? But I think we're meant to have a big picture. He was headed picture the map with me. Are you ready? You have Israel here. If here's the Mediterranean Sea, you have this region of the Philistines where it's almost always you can have good crops there. And so he started that way. He's here, kind of down on the southern portion of that. The next step is pop over down to Egypt. And I think God tells him, no, you just stay right here in this land. And so then I think we're going to hear story of him dwelling in this land before they go back up to Beersheba. And so I think that's the flow, if that makes sense. Okay, why don't we wrap up this story and make it to the end of verse 16 and then pick up from there. So Abimelech warns the people, verse 11. Verse 12, Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and gained more and more until he became very wealthy. He had possessions of flocks and herds and many servants, so that the Philistines envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped and filled with earth all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father. And Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us, for you are much mightier than we. We're going to keep developing the story next time of how he responds to that, how they respond to it, how they're going to make peace again later. But what we see is right now, at least, it's tense. And it's tense, maybe not right when he comes down, but over the course of a growing season, he just explodes in profitability. He becomes very rich, and he becomes very mighty, and he's probably going to start digging these wells again. They had filled the wells that Abraham had dug because Abraham was somewhere else now. And we're going to see that soon Isaac is going to start redigging some of those wells as he travels back up to Beersheba. So if we were to see what the Lord is doing in this story, I think you see it right at the end of verse 12. The Lord blessed him. And the Lord had promised to do this. He promised Abraham, and then he told Isaac, this blessing has now passed to you, and now we get to see this. And it didn't come slowly, it came quickly. The Lord has greatly multiplied him already so that the people that he's having to sojourn among, they're ready for him to leave. They envy him, and they're scared of him, and they want him to leave. They want him to go back up to where he's from. Okay? So we don't have any time for questions. Let me wrap it up, but I think you can see an astounding display of God's sovereignty. He's doing what he wants. He's sovereign over the womb. He's sovereign over the futures of those children and those nations. And you also see an amazing way that he's keeping his promises, being faithful to do exactly what he said he would do. So let me pray. Father, help us, help hammer this into our minds and in our hearts that you keep your promises, that you always do what's right. Help us trust you. Help us trust that since you're sovereign over all things, we can trust that whatever happens is under your sight and under your care, and you're working all things for the good of those who love you. Help us trust you with all of our heart. Help us trust your word and what you've promised. In Jesus' name, amen.